This happened back in 2017 when I was a junior in college. My friend Tyler and I had been planning this trip to a resort in the Poconos for months. But we got a late start because of a massive snowstorm that hit right when we were supposed to leave. By the time we actually pulled into the resort parking lot, it was nearly 2 in the morning, and the place was a ghost town. There was a light on in the main lobby, but the doors were locked and a sign said to use the digital check-in on the resort app. I was already in a bad mood because the zipper on my main suitcase had completely snapped off while I was loading the car, so I had to use a bungee cord to keep the thing shut. And every time I took a step through the deep slush, I felt like my clothes were about to spill out into the snow. Tyler was just as tired as I was, and we were both freezing. We got to our building, but when I tried to use the digital key on my phone, nothing happened. And I tried it 5 or 6 times, but the reader on the door just stayed red. I was about to walk back to the lobby to find a phone when this guy pulled up in one of those little utility vehicles with a plow on the front. He was wearing a heavy navy blue parka, and he had a radio clipped to his chest. He didn't act weird or anything. He actually looked more annoyed than we were, and he hopped off the vehicle and asked us if we were trying to get into Building B. When I told him the digital key wasn't working, he sighed and started swearing about the resort's new computer system. He told us he was the night maintenance lead, and that he'd been dealing with this all night because a pipe had burst in the main wing. It seemed totally normal. He complained about his boss for a minute and told us that our room was probably flooded anyway. Then he said he was authorized to put us in one of the staff overflow units for the night, which he said were actually nicer because they had their own kitchenettes. We throw our bags on the back of his vehicle, and he'd give us a ride over there since it was on the far edge of the property. Tyler and I looked at each other and just felt relieved because we were so cold and tired that we didn't even think to ask for an ID or anything. We threw our stuff in the back and we hopped on. He started driving away from the main resort area, and we were going down these narrow unlit paths that were covered in a lot of snow. I noticed that the further we went, the worse the road got. I asked him how much further the staff units were, and he just pointed ahead and said we were nearly there, that the resort kept the staff housing hidden away so the guests wouldn't complain about them having better views. He even offered Tyler a cigarette, and they started talking about some football game, and it felt so casual that I stopped paying attention to where we were going. But then we reached this clearing where the forest opened up, and I saw a dark SUV, just sitting there in the middle of the road with its engine running. 2 guys were standing there by the front bumper, and they were just watching us pull up. I told the guy to stop because it didn't look like we were at a resort building anymore. He didn't slow down though and told me to stay on the vehicle, that his friends were just there to help us with the bags. That was when the guy looked back at me for a split second in the light from the SUV, and his whole expression was just different, like he had stopped pretending to be the maintenance guy. I just told Tyler we had to get out of there right then, and we both scrambled off the back of the plow while it was still moving. We hit the packed snow and ice pretty hard. I heard my suitcase hit the ground and burst open, but I didn't even look back at it. We lunged into the forest and were just throwing ourselves through the deep powder, trying to put as much distance between us and the road as possible. I could hear the guys from the SUV shouting, and the beams from their flashlights were jumping all over the trees behind us. And honestly, I thought my lungs were going to give out because of how deep the snow was, and how hard it was to move. We kept stumbling and pushing through the brush until the forest finally opened up near the main resort road. We didn't stop running until we reached the lobby and started pounding on the glass. The security guard let us in, and the police arrived about 20 minutes later. They went out to look for the guys, but they told us they didn't find anyone, also that the SUV was gone. They found my suitcase and most of my clothes scattered in the snow, but my laptop and Tyler's bag were missing. The people running the resort told us that they didn't have a night maintenance lead working that shift, and they had no idea who those guys were. The police took a report and told us they'd update us if they found the vehicle, but it's been years now, and they obviously never found anything. It's chilling to think about what would have happened if we had actually gone into that building, or if I hadn't seen those guys waiting by the SUV. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve, and me, Kyle, and Ricky did our usual winter thing, which is drive out to this lake a couple towns over and walk out on the ice for a bit. It's not a party replacement or anything. We just like being out there when it's quiet, and you can hear your own footsteps and the whole place feels empty. It was snowing pretty hard that night, and it had been cold for a while, so we figured the lake would be solid enough for what we do, which is basically just walking out a little ways, taking pictures and messing around. We weren't trying to be brave. We just wanted the snow and the empty space. We didn't talk much on the drive there. It was one of those nights where the road makes you pay attention, because the snow keeps coming down, the lines disappear. I remember Ricky leaning forward a lot trying to see through the windshield. And I remember Kyle driving slower than he normally would. I remember thinking that it was the kind of weather where you could pass someone on the road and not even realize it. We parked in the little lot near the trail and it was completely empty, which wasn't surprising because it was late and nobody normal goes out there in a snowstorm. We got out and it was freezing. The wind was doing that thing where it finds every gap in your jacket no matter how tight you pull it closed. We walked through the trees toward the lake, and the snow was coming down steady enough that it softened everything. Even our voices sounded smaller, and then the lake opened up. It was just a big, flat white stretch with the shore on both sides, and a faint line of trees in the distance. We stepped out onto the ice, stayed closer to the edge at first because it's just what you do even if you think it's fine. Kyle picked up a rock and tossed it out. It slid and made a dull sound and nothing happened, so we walked out more. Not far enough to be stupid, but far enough that it felt like you were out there. I had my phone out because the pictures always look good with fresh snow. But the camera kept fogging and it was annoying because I'd wipe it and it would clear up, and then I'd lift it again and the lens would cloud over. I'd end up with these blurry shots that looked like nothing, so I kept stopping and messing with it like that was going to fix it. After a while, we started heading toward this old ice fishing shack that's been on the lake for years. It's not ours and it's not nice. It's just this beat-up little shack that people use as a marker because you can see it from a distance, and we've walked to it before and taken photos next to it and then left. This time we could tell something was different before we even got close, because there was light coming through the cracks. It wasn't bright like someone had a spotlight. It was just a steady, warm-looking light inside, like a lantern or a work light. It didn't belong there because nobody should have been sitting in that shack on New Year's Eve in the middle of a storm. We stopped without really agreeing to stop. We just did it at the same time and watched for a second, because maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was somebody messing around like we were. We could see movement too. Not clearly, but enough to know there was a person in there shifting around, stopping and shifting again. It didn't look like someone setting up to fish because there weren't any holes, and there wasn't any gear on the ice around it. Then the door opened. A person stepped out wearing heavy winter stuff. His face was covered up almost completely. I couldn't make out any features because of the snow, and he was layered up like anyone would be out there for a while. He stood there for a second and looked down at the ice near the shack, like he was checking something. He walked a few steps and I saw a rope in his hand, and then a dark shape slid behind him across the ice. At first I thought it was a sled because it moved like something being pulled, but it was too limp and it kept catching and dragging unevenly. And as it got closer to the light, I could see it was a bag tied up tight and the rope was looped around it. It wasn't huge, and that almost made it creepier because it wasn't obvious what it was supposed to be. It looked like something you'd use to haul something without wanting to touch it. We just stood there watching, and I remember thinking we should turn around and go right then, because there was nothing good about what we were seeing. But at the same time, it felt impossible to look away, because my brain kept trying to come up with a normal explanation. But none of them worked. The guy bent down by the shack and did something with the rope in the bag, like he was checking the knot or tightening it. And then he straightened up, finally turned his head toward us. Kyle started backing up first. Ricky followed, and I followed. We tried to move without making a big deal out of it, which is stupid because on a frozen lake in a snowstorm you can't exactly disappear. We didn't get far before he called out to us. He asked what we were doing out there, and why we were walking toward his shack. Kyle answered because he's the type who answers when someone talks to him. He said we come out here sometimes, and we were just walking and taking pictures and leaving. The guy started walking toward us. He wasn't sprinting or anything, but he was moving straight at us like he expected us to stop and explain ourselves. He kept asking what we were doing, and he said he wasn't doing anything wrong. He said it like we were the problem, like we were the ones who showed up where we shouldn't be. And I remember how normal that sounded, which didn't match anything else about the situation. He got close enough that I could tell he was not some huge, scary guy. He was just a person bundled up and covered. The snow was sticking to his sleeves and hood. I kept trying to see his face, but there was nothing to see. Ricky said we were leaving, and the guy said fine, but he didn't move out of the way. He just stood where he was and looked past us toward the shore. And then I saw two more shapes coming out onto the ice from the direction we had walked in from. They just appeared where the trees meet the lake and started moving in our direction at a steady pace, like they had been waiting for something to happen out there. They were bundled up too, and their faces were covered the same way. They weren't waving anything around, but the way they spread out made it feel organized, like they weren't just three random people who happened to be on the same lake at the same time. I remember looking at Kyle and then looking at Ricky. It was one of those moments where nobody says anything, but you all understand the same thing at once, which was that we weren't just dealing with one guy anymore. The shoreline didn't feel like an easy exit anymore. The guy in front of us kept talking, like he wanted us to stay right there and keep answering questions. It felt like he was buying time for the other two to close the distance without making it obvious. My mind was going in circles trying to decide what they wanted, because if it was just about us seeing the bag, then why talk at all? And if it was about robbing us, then why do it out on open ice, where anybody could slip or get hurt? It didn't feel like they were trying to scare us with threats. Kyle took a step back and I took a step back. Ricky did too, and the guy matched it. I said the first thing that came to my head, which was that we had people waiting at the car. They knew we were out there, and we were heading back right now. I don't know if that mattered or if it changed anything, but it made the moment feel like it snapped, because the guy stopped asking questions for a second like he was weighing it. One of the other two picked up his pace just enough that it stopped feeling casual. Kyle turned and started running. We didn't try to be quiet anymore. Running on ice in boots and winter clothes is horrible, and I got winded almost immediately. We made it to the edge and pushed through the deeper snow near the trees. Then we were on the path back to the lot. I could hear our breathing and our boots and nothing else. I didn't look back because I didn't want to see whether they were right behind us. We got to the truck. Kyle started it and pulled out fast. The tires spun for a second and then we were moving. The headlights were shaking through the snow and the lake disappeared behind the trees like it hadn't even been there. None of us talked much on the way back at first. And then Ricky started trying to make it make sense. Kyle kept saying it was probably nothing, and I kept thinking about the light in that shack and that bag on the rope. The way the other two showed up right when the first guy started asking questions. We went back and forth about what it could have been. And that's the part that's hard to sit with, because usually even a weird night has some explanation you can settle on even if it's not perfect. But this didn't. We never got proof of anything. We didn't see what was in the bag and we didn't see a weapon. We didn't see them do something that you can clearly point to and say that's the crime right there. All we know is we were out on a lake we always go to, and there was a lit shack that shouldn't have been lit. There was a guy dragging a tied black bag across the ice, and there were two more men coming in from behind us. At the exact moment, it stopped being a strange sight and started being about us. We haven't gone back since, and we don't really talk about it much anymore. But every time I see a picture of that lake on someone's phone or I drive past the turnoff, I think about how fast a normal night can turn into something where you're just trying to get back to your car without falling and without finding out what you walked in on. This happened last December, and I'm only now writing it down, because I didn't really know what to make of it, and I guess I still don't. I was 17 at the time, and it was maybe a week before Christmas. We were getting hit with a pretty bad snowstorm, so school had been canceled for 2 days already, which normally I would have been happy about. But both my parents were sick with some kind of flu, and they were basically out of commission the whole time. My mom had been in bed since Tuesday and my dad was up a little on Wednesday. But by Thursday night he was done too, so they were both asleep upstairs. and I was trying to keep quiet and not bother them. The storm really picked up around 8 or 9 that night, and the power started acting up like it would flicker and then cut out for a few minutes and then come back on. And every time it came back, the furnace would try to kick in, but it kept failing and shutting off again, so the house was getting cold pretty fast, and I didn't really know what to do about it. I thought about waking my dad up, but he looked really rough earlier, and I didn't want to make him get out of bed over something I could probably handle myself. I knew the thermostat was in the basement, and I'd seen my dad mess with it before when the heat wasn't working, so I figured I'd just go down and try to reset it or something. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on and went downstairs. Our basement is unfinished, and it always smells damp and there's not much light even when the power is working. The thermostat is on the wall near the stair, so I walked over and looked at it. There was a switch on the side that said reset, so I flipped it and waited. The furnace made a clicking sound like it was trying to start, but then it stopped again. I was standing there trying to figure out what to do when I heard something from the other side of the basement, near the window well. I should explain that our basement has one of those small windows near the ceiling that looks out at ground level, and there's a window well outside, which is just a pit dug out so the window isn't underground. There's a plastic cover over it to keep snow and rain out. The sound was like something scraping against the cover, like someone was messing with it, or trying to lift it off. I stopped and listened, and there it was again, this shuffling, scratching noise. Then I heard what sounded like a cough, and I knew it wasn't an animal. I don't know why, but I shined my phone light over at the window. The second I did, I saw a face pressed up against the glass. It was a man. He was looking right at me. I can't really describe his expression because it happened so fast, but he didn't look surprised to see me. It was more like he was waiting for me to notice him. And the second my light hit his face, he dropped down out of view. I stood there with my phone pointed at the window. My hand was shaking and I didn't know what to do. My brain just kind of stopped. I kept thinking maybe I imagined it, but I knew I didn't. I stayed still for maybe a minute, trying to hear anything over the wind outside. And then I heard footsteps. They were outside, but I could hear them through the walls. They were moving from the side of the house where the basement window was, toward the back, where the back door is. I knew what that meant, or I thought I did, because it felt like this person knew. I was in the basement and was trying to get me to come up and open the back door without thinking, like maybe they'd knock and I'd just answer because I was scared and confused. I didn't move. I just stayed in the basement with my light off now. I listened to the footsteps go all the way to the back of the house and stop. Then, I heard a knock on the back door. I didn't go upstairs. I stayed where I was, trying to decide if I should wake my parents or call 911. And I think the reason I didn't right away was because part of me kept thinking maybe it was a neighbor who needed help, and I'd look stupid calling the cops over nothing. The knock came again, a little louder. I waited maybe 5 minutes before I went upstairs, but I didn't go to the back door. I went to the living room and looked out at the backyard, but I couldn't see anyone. The snow was coming down hard and the porch light was off, so it was hard to make out anything. I checked the back door, and it was locked. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch with my phone and kept watching the windows. In the morning I went outside. The window well cover was pushed halfway off. There were footprints in the snow, leading from the window well along the side of the house to the back porch, and then out to the street. I told my parents, and we called the police, but by the time they got there, the snow had filled most of the prints in, so there wasn't much to see. Nobody really knew what to think of it. He could have been trying to break in, or he could have been someone who needed help and panicked when he saw me. I don't know. I never saw him again after that night, though.